our broadcast. Okay, and then now I'm going to broadcast. Okay, welcome everybody. Happy New Year. This is the January 6th Environment and Climate Committee meeting. I think it looks like we have almost everybody that will be expecting, but since it's 11, I think we should go ahead and get started. So we will start with a roll call. So just say here when I call your name. So we have, first we have Bill Welch, Kavi Chakshi.
Here.
Kelly Jensen.
Here.
Kirsty Marion. Mark Buckley.
Here.
Neil Bonsgard.
Here.
Peter Grube.
Here.
Rory Isbell.
Here.
Serena Dietrich.
Here.
And Tess Gardner.
Here.
Okay, great. And then Kirsty did tell me she couldn't make it today. I am expecting Bill to, I didn't hear from him that he couldn't attend. So let me just get my screen share up.
I'm not sure what protocol is, but I checked in with Cassie that I'll have to leave a little early.
Yes, thank you. Are you guys looking at my PowerPoint screen now?
Not yet.
Oh. Now?
There you go.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry, I'm like, it's always a little hard to tell. Okay, so again, welcome everybody. And this is the agenda for today. We will approve the meeting minutes first from the December meeting. We'll have time for public comment. I'll share a couple of very brief updates. And then one of the main goals for today is to review the council goal setting input for that listening session that's on Monday. And then reviewing the final changes that we made to our guidelines and principles document and hopefully being able to actually approve those. Then we'll have a discussion about our ex officio public agency representatives and what kind of next steps you all want to take with respect to that. And then I actually want to have a discussion of kind of taking a step back. And now that we've kind of gotten through these first couple of marathon meetings to get to this council listening session that we have to prepare for, I want to have a step back and just hear from you all about how you're all feeling about where the committee's at and kind of what some next steps you all feel like you need to be able to do your work most effectively. And then hopefully at the end, I'd like to circle back on the chair and vice chair discussion. Ideally, we can elect those at the first meeting of the year, which would be this meeting, because I know we're still early and we've had this discussion about not feeling totally ready yet. At that point in the agenda, I want to just hear from you all if you feel like you're ready to make that decision or if you'd like another month to do that. And then we'll wrap up with agenda setting for the next meeting. Our first order of business is just to approve the meeting minutes from December 14th. So hopefully you all had a chance to review those. They were in your packet. Is anyone willing to make a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Okay, and then all in favor, just raise your hand on your video and I'll take a look. Does that work for you, Kayla? Do you want them to raise their Zoom hand or their?
I'd prefer, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd prefer that they just do like, if there's anybody opposed and if anybody says aye or whatnot, because I can't see their hands. Give me a second. Okay, actually I can. I see everybody except for Serena. Oh, there we go. And I just wanted to let you know, Bill is in the attendees and along with Counselor Goodman Campbell.
Oh, okay, let me move them over. Okay, perfect.
And it looks like that everybody approved. We have a unanimous.
I think too, I think the trick, I'm pretty sure the trick to making sure that you join as a panelist instead of an attendee is to join through the auto-generated email from Zoom and not through the link on the agenda, I think. Just so everybody knows. Okay, so thank you. Motion carries to approve the meeting minutes. And then next we have public comment. So to any member of the public who is currently observing, if you have a comment you'd like to make, if you have a comment that you would like to make during the public comment, please use the raise hand function now by clicking the raised hand icon. And if you are calling in, please press *9 to raise your hand. And I will call on anyone who has their hands raised. But it looks like we actually don't have any attendees in Zoom today. So we may have people watching over the live stream, but to make a public comment, you have to join in through Zoom. So with that, we can move on from the public comment. I will add that hopefully you all saw that I sent a couple of comments that did come in the last week to you by email. So those are part of the public comments on record for today's committee meeting. And they did, the two individuals did request the committee member emails. So I did provide those to them. So you may receive emails directly from them. And one of them shared with me that she did go ahead and send you all an email. So you may get a little bit of a duplicate there. Okay.
Can you,
Move.
Cassie,
Yeah.
This is Neil. Can you clarify how the public comment process works before the meetings? Like, is there a deadline? I know our contact info is available, but just what the process is of getting stuff into record. Because I was a little confused with some of the duplicate emails and trying to figure out how to best sort through everything.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Neil. And to be honest, because we're still kind of in a new territory with doing public comment for virtual meetings. I'm not sure what our standard is. I don't know what the one is for council. So as I got those in this week, because they were people that, had it been in a non-virtual environment, they would be able to present that information a little bit more easily. So I wanted to send it out today, but I will check in with what the council's process is, because I'm sure that they get those. So Kayla, are you familiar with what our normal process is for that, or Councilor Goodman Campbell? If people are submitting public comments in writing to staff before a council meeting, do you wait until it can be included in the next packet? Are you familiar?
I'm not sure. Yeah, what the procedure is on that.
Okay. Yeah, I will just check. I'll
Usually
check
we
in.
just get comments via email about a number of issues and.
Right. Yeah. So I'll check with Neil. Thanks for bringing that up. It's like I said, it's just a little bit of new territory for us with our new environment.
And I also want to just clarify something on that point too. So when we get those emails, we're still we have to be really careful we don't reply all to those
Yes.
emails, correct? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We can still reply individually to the commenter and talk to them directly. Is that okay?
I think so. It might be something we want to talk about as a group, how we want to handle that kind of thing, because it might be something, I guess maybe we can have, it's not really something that we've covered in that guidelines and principles document, how to interact with that, because I think on the one hand, it may be beneficial to go through the chair or some kind of central person, so that just to avoid too many, if there's topics that the committee members haven't discussed all together, I don't know how much you all want to give each other kind of the freedom to talk individually to different members of the public, or how you want to do that. does anyone have any thoughts on that while we're on the topic of it? I know city councilors will get individual emails and they are allowed to, you know, talk with members of the public as they get those emails. Of course, you can't talk for the full committee, like they can't speak for the full council, but do any of you have a preference of how to interact with those?
Yeah,
Well,
I think it would be.
Sorry, maybe we should do just raising Zoom hands and then I can call on people. That'll be easier. Rory.
Thanks. I think it would be fine to set up a procedure where like a chair gets CC'd, but other than that, I think it would be not a great idea to say that we couldn't individually respond to someone. I just see that as a big part of our role being on this committee of being an outlet for the public to bring concerns to a city body on environment and climate change issues. So I don't think we should remove that ability.
Okay. Peter?
I agree with Rory's intention that communication's important, but pertaining to your agenda item for later in the meeting, how do we feel it's going and using our time effectively and efficiently? I think we should be intentional about these issues. I have some familiarity with CPACE. I didn't know anything about tree. It would be inefficient if we are all one-on-one trying to become experts on each of these issues. So some kind of a systematic approach of who and how we're handling, because I could see in 1 month we've had 2 complex issues that can keep coming at us and could dilute our effectiveness.
Cassie, this is Kayla. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would suggest maybe checking in with legal too to see if they have a preference.
Kavi, you had your hand up. Do you have something you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I like how Rory covered it. I do think public input is a big part of our role. And I was also just thinking, just even sending a quick thank you email to some of the people who've sent us public comments, if that's okay, if we're just, it's a quick, just thank you for your input, just so they know it's being heard by members. Because right now I haven't replied to any of them so far.
Sure. I think sending just a thank you for your comment would be fine, absolutely fine. Bill?
Bill, you're muted.
You're on mute. You're muted, Bill.
I think it would be important to interact with people, but I think we have to be careful not to represent ourselves as what the committee is. As the committee, we're more individuals in that case. So I think we have to be a little bit careful that we don't represent our view as the same as the committee's. But I don't know, I guess you could ask clarifying questions, and that would be something you'd want to do. And we're going to be reaching out as well to people, and people are going to walk up to us too that know us and have their opinions too. So in that case, we also have to be careful not to represent our views as that of the committee.
Mark?
Yeah, I think I agree with Bill in that we should focus that communication probably on information gathering, clarification, understanding, especially things that then we can bring back to the committee. But any outward messaging, probably important that we are communicating the committee's position. And if the committee doesn't have a position yet, we probably can't really say much in that active sense, at least as our role as a committee member.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think doing, I think a lot of times members of the public will send those emails, and a lot of times we share with them, if they contact staff and say, hey, I'd like to move this initiative forward, usually my direction to them is that they should get in touch with the chair or other committee members, the same way they can get in touch with individual city councilors if they have initiatives that they would like the committee to kind of take up. So just kind of thinking through it now, I think it does make sense to allow committee members to certainly engage and do some fact finding, learn more about the topic if they're interested in it, because then the committee members can, if there's a committee member that's sufficiently interested in that topic, it might be something that you'd want to bring, and actually propose as an agenda item. at a later meeting. And so that's kind of a channel that members of the public have, is to get, almost like a committee member sponsor of a certain idea. So we'll just table this discussion for now, since we're getting a little off the agenda. But I think that this type of discussion will come back to later in the agenda, when we kind of talk about what our next steps are as a committee, because I think there are a number of things that we might want to spend time talking through, as far as what is our process for certain things, or other types of information, and kind of just like groundwork, foundational information that we feel like we need to do in order to better effectively engage with the public and actually make recommendations. So having a couple of these come in early, when the committee's so new, is, I think, helpful, so that you all and we all can see kind of some of the scenarios that will have, that will come to us, and then we can start working through our processes. And also, I think likely in the whole first year of the committee, since it is a new committee and we don't have those processes, we'll probably have a lot of things like this, where something comes up and it's not something that we have really dealt with as a committee before. So we'll have to come up with a way, kind of what the standard committee process is. And I think that'll be part of just being the first time committee, as opposed to, other committees that have really, they've been doing following a certain process for years. But like we've shared, different committees do handle these things kind of differently. So you all have the ability to kind of set your own process for a lot of things. But I will also check in with legal to see if they have any kind of guidance and direction, because they often do. And we will have a member of the city attorney's office joining us. They just had to come a little late today. So we might be able to come back to this in the next, later in the agenda. Yes, Peter?
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we know that these important issues, whether someone has latched onto them and they're being moved forward, or if we all think someone else has latched onto them and they get lost in the shuffle somehow? Is there a process or a system for that? Or maybe I just misunderstood.
You mean like if someone sends an email and you mean, assuming someone else has it, someone else is going to follow up on that? Or,
well, if we use just pick one. So the CPACE issue came up. Apparently someone's put a lot of research and work into it. I think Bill's researching it. Bill thinks I'm researching it. And 6 months from now, nobody's advanced the topic of CPACE.
Yeah. Well, maybe, again, I think that's the process we still have to discuss. So I don't think we've decided exactly yet how to do it, but I think maybe we should just discuss it later in the agenda, so we can kind of get through the other agenda pieces. But my one thought on that specifically could be the idea of CCing the chair, so that the chair and staff too would be able to kind of gauge that. So that might be one way. Okay. But yeah, definitely, I think it's worth a broader discussion that we can have soon. Serena?
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking too, even just creating a parking lot and making sure that each of those, commentary things that come through get put on some sort of parking lot for a potential agenda item, or somewhere where it gets followed up in some way, shape, or form. I'm guessing that, we talked about having something like that somewhere anyway. So I think just making a process where anytime we do get communication, it gets put in there, unless we already have it as an item on the agenda. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know that the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance has a parking lot that I actually think they review, either the chair and staff review every month, or the whole committee reviews every month, to make sure things aren't getting lost. So good discussions. I really do think we'll have more time to talk about this stuff. So moving on in the agenda to updates, I just have super brief updates. I just wanted to circle back on, there was this idea of an information repository and also getting access to some of the data that went into the CCAP and also our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and all that. So I just wanted to, I didn't have a lot of time to work on that in the last couple of weeks, since this meeting, of course, came up kind of quickly and it was over the holidays, but I will be working on that. So I just want to let you all know that some way of kind of transferring information like that will be coming soon. And then the other update I wanted to share is just a reminder about that meeting poll for a regular meeting schedule. We sent out a Let Us Meet poll, which was at Mark's suggestion. It's a new tool for me, but it allows me to just see what everyone's availability is instead of having everyone like pick individual, instead of proposing every single doodle time imaginable and having people pick those. So if you have not filled that out yet, please do. And then I'd like to, starting in the next meeting, pick, you know, the one time that's going to work, you know, certain day and time of the week and a certain week of the month. That will be our regular meeting time moving forward. So yes, and Bill?
Just a quick question. So what you meant in that email was February was the proxy for what our availability is? Because there wasn't
Yes,
that's what you meant, right?
Yeah, because you still have to choose, at least as far as I could figure out, you still had to propose like specific dates. So I just did a week, you know, in February, but do respond to that with what your general availability is. So if you, even if you know that on that specific date in February, you have a one-time conflict, but that otherwise that time works for you, still fill that out like it will, like that time will work for you, because it's meant to be like what your ongoing availability is.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Before we move on to the rest of the agenda, does anyone else have any kind of like burning questions or updates of their own related to the committee work that they feel like is important to kind of talk about up front before we get into some of the agenda items?
I just wanted to make a quick note that I'm having some technical issues on my computer. That's why I keep going in and out on my phone, and if it's appearing hazy. So I just want to mention that real quick.
Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. So next we're going to talk about our input into the council goal listening session. So a reminder that that listening session is this coming Monday from 3 to 5 p.m. It's just a virtual session. It's a 5-minute presentation, and Mark agreed at our last meeting to be the presenter for this session. So we have the goal input form that we looked at last meeting, and you all should have reviewed a draft version of responses for that for this meeting. We need to turn in that goal input form this Friday, and then the presentation will essentially just be kind of presenting what's included in that form. So the draft that I sent out, I put together with Mark, Kelly, and Serena. And then I also had a chance, because Kirsty wasn't going to be available today, I also did meet with her with the draft, and I incorporated some of her input as well. So for those of you that helped on the first draft, if you saw some changes from the last version I sent out, that was incorporating some of Kirsty's edits. So we're just going to spend some time now reviewing with you all that form and make sure you're comfortable with what we're submitting. So we'll just kind of go section by section and have an open discussion on your thoughts. And so please just raise your hand when we get to the different sections, if there's anything you'd like to add or delete or kind of re-emphasize for the presentation and for each of those sections. And just to keep in mind, because it's due Friday, we won't really have time to, you know, if we make substantive edits, we won't be able to come back as the committee and review and approve those. And I know that that's not ideal, but again, since we're just kind of in this crunched timeline, that's what we're working with for now. So I think if we make some, I think we can make some simple edits, or not even simple, but I think as long as we can articulate the edits today in a way that everyone feels pretty comfortable with, me going in and kind of changing those edits. And I'll still send them out tomorrow or Friday morning to everybody before I send it to the recorder, but the city recorder, but we won't be able to vote or anything like that on it. So does that sound good, everybody? Cool. Okay, so again, I have all the text up on the slide, which I know doesn't make for a good slide, but I think it's the easiest way for the public to see what we're talking about and just for you all to read. So the way that what we kind of talked about at the last meeting is the approach for this, since the committee hasn't really been able to set their own mission and goals and priorities outside of kind of the charge that's been given by the council. We stuck to kind of using language in our ordinance or in the CCAP and just kind of following that that general big picture goals that we have from that direction to kind of to fill out this form. So for the mission, we the organization's mission, we used the language that was included in the code. So that's like what the council kind of directed as the primary charge of the committee. So that language should look familiar to you. And then for the goals, we included just kind of some of the core focus areas for the committee, which is to make sure that the community climate action plan is implemented by the city and community partners, ensuring that the city uses an environmental lens in its decision making, and then creating new opportunities and incentives for private investment and innovation to support the city's environmental objectives, and then improving quality of life for Bend residents through access to and the benefits of a healthy environment. Does anyone have any thoughts, major changes, different things you'd like to emphasize for the mission and goals?
I do.
Yes, Bill.
Just one question that on that second bullet on the goals, is it also open to public investment?
The one that's about creating new opportunities and incentives for private investment.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the intention of private investment, but are we also talking about what the city could invest, or what I don't know, sorry. Anyway, I'm just curious, is that something we can add to that, or is that going beyond the scope of this thing?
No, it's definitely not going beyond the scope. I think it definitely makes sense. Mark?
I was gonna say, I think the bullet before that is trying to reference that a bit though, and it's speaking about how the city speaks about managing growth and investment in infrastructure. I guess it might be interesting to think about if we want to differentiate public and private, especially if we're thinking about how heavy of a role, the city, we have an active role here as the city in some actions, and then indirectly on other public and private actions. And if we want to differentiate city actions from all other private or public.
Yeah, and the public isn't just the city. There's lots of other agencies too.
Right.
Not a big nitpick. I think these look great. I just was curious about that one.
Yeah. Does it does it make sense then? Do other people agree to add, because we could easily add public and private investment to that third bullet. I know they're not really bulleted on the screen. But I think Mark is right that I think it was kind of like differentiating, like one bullet was really focused on the city's role. The other, I think, was to highlight like the role that the private sector can play. So that might've been the reason for separating them out. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, on including that recommendation? Rory?
Yeah, I'd support that recommendation just to put public and private investment. I see how the second bullet point talks about the city and the city's public investment, but I really agree with that point of other agencies that we could have an effect on. Like, so there's an opportunity for us to recommend something to the Parks Board that meets one of our goals. So yeah, public and private investment would work in that bullet point to me.
Bobby?
I think Rory already made the point. I'll second that, and I'll just add also county and other public areas in that sense too.
Great. Does anyone feel strongly about not including the word public in that bullet? Okay, perfect. Well then, moving on to the next section. The next question is, what is the biggest problem your organization believes the city should address? And so we have some paragraphs there just describing the threat of climate change and the threat of environmental degradation, particularly while Bend is experiencing so much quick and sustained growth. So yeah, that's what those paragraphs are. Does anyone have any thoughts or want to take this in a different direction or add anything that we didn't include? Rory?
Yeah, I think this is really great. I like how this turned out. Those of you who drafted it, I have one sort of nitpick, and that's in the very first sentence where it says a pristine surrounding natural environment. I honestly would just take out the word pristine because it's already somewhat degraded, and I don't want to try to claim something that's not true here.
Okay, that sounds good. Peter?
That's funny, Rory. I had crossed that out in my paper draft as well. But I was looking at on the last sentence, it occurred to me that to replace to do our part with in leadership. So to join with efforts of cities across the nation to do our part. I thought we could do better than that. I think there's still a leadership role, not just doing our part.
Okay. So add a statement about being like leading the effort, being willing to be a leader.
Yeah,
in
just
the effort.
delete to do our part and replace with in leadership to reduce.
Okay.
Just a proposal.
Does anyone have any either agreements with that or any, I think particularly if people strongly oppose any of the recommendations? Mark?
I respect the point, Peter and Rory, you have about pristine, that maybe that's a bit too strong, but I think we still want to, it'd be nice to somehow acknowledge that we have a really high quality environment, well above average for communities, especially if you think nationally, and that's a particular comparative advantage in a lot of ways that we want to protect for all sorts of reasons. So it'd be nice to maybe get your thoughts on something other than pristine that we could say that speaks to the quality.
I like that, Mark. In my notes, I had written healthy.
We could change, we have healthy air quality right before, we could just say healthy air quality and surrounding natural environment. Seeing some nods to that.
Can we just say beautiful or just something to still make it differentiate it?
That's funny. I was thinking beautiful too.
Beautiful. Do others like that?
Diverse. It just came up.
I think something like beautiful, focusing on the aesthetics is what we're looking for here. This is focused on economy and quality of life, and it's our natural environment, something that draws people here because of its aesthetic. So beautiful works for me. Or even something like cherished, our cherished surrounding natural environment.
Yeah, those are great. Okay.
I'll just say I like beautiful. I was trying to think of something that's a little bit more engaging in the fact that people get out and use it, that it's accessible and provides high quality opportunities, but beautiful fits the bill.
Okay, sounds like a lot of votes for beautiful, so I think we'll go with that. Okay, any other thoughts on this section before I move on?
I had one small thought as I read through that. In the very last line of the last paragraph, I agree with the thought where it says CCAP will attract progressive forward-thinking companies. I just wonder if progressive could become a little bit more political, if there's a different word that we can use that maybe has less political connotations, maybe.
Other thoughts on that? We could take out progressive and just leave forward thinking as one idea.
Maybe innovative forward thinking companies.
I like
Innovative.
that.
Sustainably minded.
Yeah, that might be a good one. Because I think that's what we're trying. Progressive means you're open and thinking for new ideas. So progressive and forward thinking are kind of synonymous in some ways, but sustainably minded that's a different modifier.
Other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, I think innovative or sustainably minded, I'll play around and see which one kind of fits a little bit better. Or if we could add, we might be able to add the word innovative elsewhere in the sentence or something and kind of keep all of it. Okay, moving on to the next section. This question was, if we solve this problem, what would the outcome look like? Paint a vision. And so we included the first sentence is that kind of short vision statement from the Community Climate Action Plan. And then the rest of the bullets were actually taken primarily from the CCAP. We have in the CCAP, there's early on, there's a section about like goals, kind of outcomes. What do we want the outcome of implementing the CCAP to look like? So the bullets were largely paraphrasing some of those. And then we also added one about improving quality of life for underserved and underrepresented community members, just promoting equity and social justice, because that wasn't actually one of the outcomes that we had were really sector specific and not kind of big picture in the CCAP. So any thoughts on this, different directions you want to take it in, things to add or delete?
I think this looks great.
I think it looks great too. I have one suggestion to maybe consider just reordering these bullets. And I'm thinking about, you know, what I know about our new city council, which admittedly is not much since the majority of it will be new, but just based on campaigns and statements that I've heard, I think we might potentially have better chance of catching their attention if we move the 4th and 6th bullets towards the top. So that's the transportation one, the lower carbon transportation, the 4th bullet, and then that new bullet, Cassie, that you described, adding on quality of life for underserved and underrepresented community members. I think that you know, getting our work here identified in council's goals, we might have better chances of doing that by appealing to some of those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Kavi?
The one thought I had as I read through those is I think they are, I think they're really good. The one idea I had was that it says paint a vision. To me, that sounds like a very holistic, big picture kind of idea. And I wonder if there could be a bullet that just says something, you know, overall making Bend a more sustainable city, something along those lines. I don't know if I missed that in there, but that was one idea I had.
Okay, thank you. So just maybe more explicitly, like calling that out. Mark?
Yeah, I like the points Rory and Kavi you both made, and I think they could fit together, especially bringing that last bullet up. And that seems like the kind of place we might be able to work it in. It is a little bit more focused on sensitive populations, and I don't know if that's packing too much into it. Do you think, Cass, that we should try to avoid having a whole 7th bullet?
No, I think we can add a bullet for sure.
Is that big picture? I mean, we kind of were getting at it on the prior page. Some of those other things we're trying to ensure are a little bit more broad, and these are kind of specific. I know that we were thinking probably in terms of trying to have very actionable, discrete, even measurable. What your point about the vision word is an important one. So maybe if we had teed it off in some way at a very high level.
What if placement wise, I'm sorry, Cassie, let me know if I should raise my hand first.
No, it's okay.
What if placement wise, it would make sense to add it in the paragraph before the bullets where we kind of said overall, this is the vision, I guess, of creating and I don't know exactly what words would make the most sense there, but just something that creates a little bit more of a vision picture and then details it out with the bullets saying these are the ways we're doing it. I think the preceding paragraph kind of touches on some of that. I just didn't kind of see it as a whole city vision of like being a more sustainable city.
Yeah, that was my thought too, is it might fit in that first paragraph. You could kind of just add a phrase. Peter?
Yeah, I was actually hoping just for a little bit of clarification. This could be, again, my lack of understanding on what's currently the 5th bullet point. The statement, the second half, reduce the upstream impact of materials. I was hoping that the folks who wrote that could maybe clarify what it meant by reduce the upstream impact of the materials.
Yeah, so that was referring to like the greenhouse gas emission. Part of our greenhouse gas, our baseline inventory showed that emissions that come from basically the production and transport of goods and services into the community has a far outsized climate impact than the total even of like all of the energy use and fuel use within our city limits. So it's called like the consumption impact when we're talking about greenhouse gas accounting, like a consumption-based inventory, but it's basically those upstream impacts like the emissions and other environmental impacts that incur just from creating the stuff that we consume and vend. I know it's not the best word. I've actually it's been a bit of a pet peeve of mine for years now because I don't know the best way to articulate it, especially because it's not something people are super familiar with. Knowing
right,
what that is,
that was
my better term?
I appreciate what you're grappling with there. I just wondered if I'm the city council and I'm reading this for the first time, and I want to make this happen. What does that look like from reading that bullet point?
What if we said that reduces the impact of materials or something that are produced and transported from outside of our community, or something that just more explicitly states that we're talking about the impact of things coming to our community. That didn't come out as articulately as it sounded in my head.
Well, if it was easy, we would have it already.
Good point.
I think part of the issue is we're talking about, this bullet is addressing two different issues. One is how we're managing waste and materials. And then the second is what are we bringing into our community and what impact does that have in communities where things are manufactured and transported? And so
you hit the nail on the head, Kelly.
So it may just, to reduce confusion, it may be helpful to say adopting a holistic management approach towards waste and materials use. And then the second being focused on the manufacturing and transportation of the materials we bring in and bend. And I'm happy, this is an area I work a lot in, so I'm happy to help craft that and send it out to the group.
So, so the suggestion is just to create two bullets out of that one, basically.
Yeah.
Do others agree with that or disagree with that?
Could you could you go through it again, how you would separate them and what the content is in each? I like what I heard, but I just want to make sure I got how you're separating them.
Yeah, absolutely. So one is about how the city of Bend would manage materials, waste and materials that are within the city limits. So that's the adopting a holistic waste management approach. The second is more of a materials approach, which is what are we consuming within our city city that is manufactured and transported here. And so how do we work upstream, in other words, with producers, manufacturers, companies who are making goods that Bend residents purchase and are delivered here? So one is about procurement and one is about waste management.
Yeah, good. I like that approach because it's easier to do something about. It's easier to approach them, and that I think we're supposed to be practical.
Yeah, and Paula, actually, one of the attendees mentioned material management being a word that DEQ uses, which I think material management versus waste management makes kind of encompasses that holistic discussion as well, as you were just talking about, Kelly.
Right, which in the CCAP, we actually call the section materials management, and we just have both. So that was why I tried to smush them into one, but it is a good point. So maybe for that one, then it sounds like people agree on separating those. So I can, right after the meeting today, Kelly, I can draft up a version and send them to you if you have time to kind of quickly respond, just since we have to get the final draft in soon.
Absolutely.
Would that be something cool? Thank you so much. Kavi, your hand is up. Is that from before, or do you have something to add?
That was from before.
Okay. Okay, any other thoughts for this section? Perfect. Okay, and then this section is if you know of suggested plans or objectives to achieve this change, please describe. So for this one, the idea behind what we put in here was that the recommendation to achieve the vision was to implement the CCAP, without needing to kind of re-articulate all of the parts of the CCAP, is that the CCAP was created as a way to achieve the objectives that we just described. So that first paragraph kind of explains that. And then I even italicized and underlined that kind of main takeaway sentence. And then the second paragraph was, in addition to just the CCAP, the city should also kind of create a process or a tool through which it can evaluate all policy or investment decisions. So that's kind of a nod to the non-CCAP things that that the committee feels like the council should be looking at, but and the environmental impacts of other decisions. Thoughts or different approaches you'd like to see on this one? Rory?
Yeah, in the second paragraph, I appreciate you putting that in there, Cassie. I'm wondering if policy or investment decisions is maybe a little too narrow, and that maybe it should just be decisions in general, since there are things that the city does or decides on that aren't just investments or policy, but so maybe just policy, investments, and other decisions with a climate and environmental lens.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you say to take it out altogether, or say policy or investment and other decisions? Sorry.
Yeah, that works. Policy, investment, or other decisions.
Okay. Kavi?
So I think I had a general question. And I think it applies to this section and also maybe the previous section too. So I know based on the purpose of the ECC, it mentions that the CCAP is a big part of it, but also advocating for environmental lens throughout the city in terms of decision making. And I think one question I had is, would it also make sense to add either in this section or the previous section something about also in light of news at a national level in terms of advocacy at the state or national level as well, if the city can play more of a role in terms of also advocating for environmental and climate action?
What do others have thoughts on including like an advocacy piece in there?
I would hesitate in linking anything to the current political environment because that's just going to be subject to change. And if we want this to persist in our community, I think it just keeping it separate from any current political environment might help with that.
Thanks. Other thoughts on that?
I do think there is still a role for the city to play a role in the policies that maybe limit what we can do. And so there is an advocacy role for the city to engage on these issues as it engages on other issues, but hasn't really entered the space of asking for or advocating in the climate space at the state level.
Sorry, and I should have been clear. I'm not against the advocacy wordage. I'm just against framing it in the current political environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with this. I don't think we should talk about political environments because they change constantly, as you mentioned. But advocacy, it seems like we've already talked about that, and it's in some of the action items in the plan to advocate, like code changes and a bunch of different things. So it's all, I think it's woven through the plan. So I don't think it would be bad to include some comment about that the city should be advocating. And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Okay, so maybe adding a sentence or two about participating in advocacy at the state and federal levels, but just keeping it like neutral to any specific policies or specific administrations or anything like that. Does anyone feel strongly about not doing that? Or other thoughts? Mark?
I was just going to say, maybe if we are a little bit more explicit that we are advocating for specific things, and they can be very general still in terms of our mission, advocating for basically advocating for actions or strategies consistent with our mission, consistent with the CCAP and related, because sometimes advocacy, kind of like the word progressive, can end up having a bit more of a burden on it than it's intended.
Javi, do you have something else, or is that from before?
I think that was from before, but I think I agree with what Mark and many others said. So I think putting it in a way that's not necessarily political, but also kind of noting that we are taking a lot of these actions at the city level, but also advocating for if there are state level, county level, state level, or federal level actions that kind of mirror what we're trying to do here and can help, if there's something that passes at state level that makes it easier for us to achieve our outcomes, we should also be advocating for that, I think, at the city level. So I agree with a lot of what everyone else has said. I would just also add the county level part too, just so we can also play a role at that level if we can.
Okay. And moving on to I believe this is the last question. It was describe practical steps to measure progress towards the goal. So this was specifically about measurement, and we kind of talked about measurement in previous meetings and how we haven't defined exactly how and what we want to measure as the committee yet, outside of kind of some of those big picture things. So we talked about measuring progress on the emission reduction goals by continuing to do those emissions inventories every couple of years. And then we just kind of made a general statement about how there are other key indicators that can be measured more frequently and regularly than that, so we just included a couple of examples of relevant indicators. And then the second paragraph is just kind of reiterating that as we develop new policies and programs, that we should be committed to determining indicators for each of those so we can measure progress of those. We just don't know what they are yet since we haven't implemented the programs yet. So that was kind of the approach we took for that. So any thoughts or differences in approach or anything specifically you'd like to add or delete? Bill?
Well, I really appreciate this section because I know in the last meeting, it's kind of a bug of mine too, that I feel like we have a numeric goal and we need to try to develop some numeric ways to measure our progress. And this is addressing that. It doesn't say what we have to do specifically, but that I think that's part of our charge, is to do the things that are said here, because we want to know how well we're doing. And I just hope we can, I think this allows us to spend some time addressing how to track in a way that's actually verifiable and so that we can know whether we're getting where we need to go or not. And I think that's important. And so I really appreciate this section.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I second that, Bill. I think it might even be worth including the language of we have a numerical goal and measuring progress on a regular basis against that goal. It should be the very practical step. Like this question is really asking exactly what that goal is, and being able to see that progress on a regular basis, or see that we aren't meeting it and need to provide even more attention towards the solutions that have been identified.
So the first sentence does say the city should track its progress on its emissions reductions goals by doing the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So would it be helpful to just to write out, to remind them what those numerical goals are, like to just kind of reiterate that? Because that first sentence, I think was our attempt at stating that kind of upfront, like that's the main measurement, is measuring the emissions. Or am I missing what you're suggesting a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think you got it exactly. I think just stating what that goal is, if it's not,
okay,
if it doesn't take up too many more sentences, I think it makes it more direct or powerful.
Okay. Peter?
Yeah. I was looking at so I realized in the second sentence that those are just examples that can be measured. And I wonder what the committee thinks about overall electricity consumption. To me, the overall amount of consumption isn't really that relevant. What's relevant is the source of that consumption. So I don't want to be a red herring or distraction, but if we're really going after carbon, the source of the consumption, if it's less coal and more clean energy, we can have more consumption. It doesn't matter. So what we're measuring should be where our energy supply is originating from, what's producing it, not how much is being used.
Carbon-based energy, something like that, specific set of overall energy consumption.
What's that, Mark?
Sorry, not to cut in, but just on that point, if we just say overall sort of carbon-based or non-renewable or something like that.
Yeah, I think having been around this for a while, we need clarity within the public and within this process that what we're actually going after is the carbon emissions, not the use of electricity per se. Does that make sense?
Except they go hand in hand. And I guess I like the notion of energy is probably the right word to substitute for electricity. I understand what you're saying, Peter. Agreed. We're trying to get at the carbon content, but that's affected by both how much we use, what type of where we're getting our energy, and then electricity, how it's generated. So yeah, maybe we need a section, and maybe we do need. Well, again, these are examples, and maybe we just didn't look at their examples as opposed to being, this is what we're going to do specifically.
I completely agree. Having been in this conversation for quite a long time, as you have, I have noticed a disconnect in much of the public between understanding the amount of electricity they're using versus the equivalent of CO2 emissions. And I feel that it matters to clarify that disconnect. So if you're powering your electric vehicle from a coal-fired power plant in the Midwest, that's great for you here in Bend, but it's kind of crappy for the place where the coal-fired power plant and the environment is. However, if you are powering your electric vehicle with clean energy, I don't care if you drive back and forth across the country for the rest of your life. There's no emissions associated with that. And it seems obvious to me, but I've noticed there's a big difference when we're hunting efficiency. That's great, but we need to be hunting relevant to the amount of carbon related to that production.
Could we switch the instead of electricity consumption, could we say energy use and related emissions? So
yeah, something that's simple.
Yeah, and then we can talk about the importance of it kind of in subs. I think all of the points that you're making, Peter, are really important, but just broadening that at this point would be able to encompass both of those things and not miss out on the fact that gas is a significant emissions piece, not just electricity too.
Yeah, it could be like overall energy use and something about the use and the source of that energy if we wanted to keep both, or we could drop out the consumption part altogether. But since energy efficiency is still a part of the CCAP, it may make sense to keep some piece of that. But I agree that, yeah, tying both makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't mean this to derail the whole thing. It's fantastic. It's just everyone has their little pet peeve. That's mine. It'll probably be a common theme that what we're going after is carbon reduction.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Any other thoughts on this section?
Is carbon footprint too esoteric of a concept? Does everyone know what that means at this point?
Like everyone on this committee or everyone?
I think people understand carbon footprint, but I think it puts too much of an emphasis on individual action, which in my mind misses the point. So I'm trying to avoid carbon footprint language personally.
And I don't think we can assume that everyone gets it yet, Mark. I mean, on this committee, yes, and in certain areas, yes, but.
Okay, any other thoughts? So that was the last section. Any go backs on any other sections? Or Councilor Goodman Campbell, I'm wondering too, do you have any, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any just kind of thoughts or words of wisdom as this is for the council listening session, just as the committee prepares to present to the council? Anything you want to add?
I think this has all been great discussion, and it's an overwhelming session for council. So, I think that, yeah, you're on the right track, and just making sure to have a few main points of emphasis that will stick with us as we go into goal setting that are related to our other, kind of bigger picture goals around things like transportation. It's really wise. So I think this is looking great.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, and just in terms of logistics, maybe Cassie, we talk about this later, but I don't know if some of this is for the group. If we want this presentation to be reading verbatim and text heavy, or if it should be a little bit more, conversational and turning these into more refined bullets. I don't know if there's a convention for these sessions already.
No, I don't think you need to read it verbatim, because they'll receive the paper copy. So I actually think my advice would be that it's actually an opportunity to kind of even articulate it in a different way, like in maybe a more conversational way, because then they'll also have the full written version. So that's just that would be my personal kind of thought on it, but definitely open to discussion from the rest of the committee.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of hoping you'd say. And so it would be, I don't know if there's another time or if this is the best time to hear from other committee members on advice or recommendations on how I do that.
Yeah, I think now would be great since it's, yeah, we won't have a time to chat really between now and then. So does anyone have any, yeah, just kind of tips or thoughts for Mark as he goes into that presentation, things you'd like him to kind of emphasize or keep in mind as he gets ready?
How's your delivery? Something like Hamilton, maybe?
Maybe I could get you to do the soundtrack for it.
I would pay attention to what we just heard from one of our city councilors who's in the meeting here with us. She's one of the people who will be hearing all of these things and you know, tying our goals into other goals that we know that the city has.
I think the main point there is that, you know, this isn't like extra. You know, this work is really core to what the city does.
Yeah, I also cued into that, Jenna, of I like that this is kind of already a part, it's an established process that we just want to emphasize. And also just recognizing what are the sticky, that might be one of the kind of sticky points that we want to come out of this, you know, long statement. And kind of trying to think of what the goal tidbit that you want each person to walk away with. And that might be one of them, but I'm curious if other people have kind of another summary point that we want to make sure we emphasize maybe in a wrap up or conclusion.
Honestly, it seems like the most powerful statement is just a couple bullet points on the state of the environment and the impact that it's having here locally as well as globally, and that we're as a committee going to be presenting recommendations. Getting into the meat of that would likely, from my perspective, especially hearing how much they may be receiving that day, be overwhelming. And so what will they take home with them is a reminder of what's critical and how we will be addressing some of those challenges in collaboration with them and residents, you know, companies alike.
And Mark, if you want, maybe you and I can also talk on like Friday or even earlier Monday, if you want to go over some of your talking points and kind of prepare a little bit, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and do I have a slide deck? Is that something I can?
No slide decks are allowed. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll coordinate and do that. Thanks for all the
advice.
That was great.
Bill?
Yeah, something that keeps coming to mind for me too, that's an important point, is Bend is growing fast, and it's that very fact has a huge impact on the environment. And if we have to address that, because those are all lost opportunities. If we don't address them, they're going to be here in the built environment, and it's going to be here for 50 years or more. And so it'll keep having its impact. So I think the fact that we're growing is an important emphasis piece, and that we have to somehow manage how that impacts the quality of life and the quality of the environment here. And that's what this committee is trying to do. And I think we're trying to be actionable and pragmatic as well, and so that we can actually see that we accomplish things.
Javi?
I guess one of the thoughts that just came to mind, and I don't know how, you know, where the committee, if the committee would be able to play a role in this or not, is I do think there's an opportunity also, hopefully at this point, to have hopefully bipartisan support on the city council for many of the objectives of CCAP going forward. And I also wonder if there's a way to engage more of the local businesses and then also get their support more openly. for much of what we're trying to do. So I would love for this to be a model for showing that regardless of political, leanings, everyone can come support action on climate change and sustainability, and then hopefully use that as a model for maybe other cities across Oregon, kind of leading that in some way in terms of a purple city.
Thanks. Okay, I think this was a good exercise. This was really helpful. I hope too, I was kind of feeling this way as we were putting this vision together with a smaller group, or just this response, is I think it's kind of a good exercise for the committee to kind of start getting just having this discussion about this big picture, kind of what direction do we want to go? How do we want to go about doing it? So we'll continue to build on these discussions moving forward, and we'll talk about that later today. But we are also naturally behind where I was hoping to be in the agenda by now. So I think I'd like to wrap this up and move on. But to close this out, I'll make these updates as soon as I can, and I will send a copy out to everybody. We won't have the ability to make edits afterwards because I don't really want to be doing that without having the full committee discussion. So, if you have any issues with some of the edits that we've talked about today, just make them known now. But otherwise, I think we should move on and get this submitted.
And I just want to thank all those that put this together. This is it looks really good.
Yeah, thank you all, everyone who was willing to spend some extra time this month working on this. It was a lot since we had kind of a short time in between, and it was over the holidays. So I super appreciate that as well. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is to review the final changes we made to the guidelines and principles document. So I met with Kersey. Kersey had suggested that the main change that we were trying to make was focused on the conduct of business, like committee member conduct. And there had been a suggestion to add just some accountability language to what respectful and inclusive conduct is. So it's one thing to say we will act respectfully and inclusively, but another to say, like, what exactly does that mean? And then what do we do about it if that isn't realized? So what is on the screen in red was the changed language. So in bullet G, those were just some additional kind of clarifications that just describe with a little bit more clarity, like what is respectful conduct, what is inclusive conduct, to make that a little bit more clear. And then under bullet H, included steps to take, just the commitment that ECC members will hold themselves accountable to this type of conduct, and what to do if someone feels like that respectful and inclusive conduct hasn't been adhered to. And it's loose. It's really just acknowledging that committee members, it's okay if a committee member feels like they were disrespected or they were somehow made to feel unsafe or experience any kind of harm, whether that's emotional or mental or physical, that they, have they should talk to the other committee member about it, and that's something that should be addressed. And then if that pathway doesn't seem like a good approach, they can also talk to the chair about it, and last they can talk to staff about it. And so we don't have specific steps as far as kind of where to go from there, but I think it would be handled on a case-by-case basis. But just acknowledging that people should feel comfortable bringing it up and talking about it if they feel like they're not experiencing in a respectful environment. So those are what we added. So does anyone have any questions, thoughts, changes to that language? Bill?
No, I don't. I think it looks fine.
Perfect. Any others?
It looks like an H, maybe you haven't totally wordsmithed it. It looks like an H, there might be a little bit of a typo in that.
Oh.
Or sort of the bigger one on the screen right now. I guess you got 2 H's, but.
Where is it?
Each other accountable for following the conduct norms. Is that how it should go? Or is that,
no,
maybe that's
nope, that's a typo. Yeah, thank you for pointing it out. I will fix that. Any
think this
other
looks great.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think this looks great, and I'm really thankful that this committee is supportive of adding this additional kind of language in here. And I want to thank Kersey, even though she's not here, for setting us on the track here. And it's a cool opportunity as a new committee to not completely break the mold in how we work together, but to kind of add to it and do something a little different by having this language in here. I just think it's awesome.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, when I asked other committees if they had anything like this, no other ones did. So I think that's it's pretty cool to be the first committee to adding a little bit of this kind of language, and hopefully something that other committees will continue to build on. Okay, so if we're good with these changes, then the version that you've all seen, once I make that, I'll make that final, I'll change that sentence to make sense, but it won't meaningfully change the meaning behind any of it. But so the version that you have in your meeting packet would be the guidelines and principles. So I'm wondering if the committee feels is willing to actually go ahead and approve this guidelines and principles document through a motion and a second.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we approve the guidelines and principles document as written with the edits, with the current edits and with the typo fixed.
This is Serena, I second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. Let's do the Zoom hands. The blue Zoom hand. Okay, and then anyone dissent, you can vocalize it out loud if you do. Okay, perfect. So motion carries. Thank you. Okay, let's see. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of, let me just get my notes out. So the next is a discussion on how we want to engage other public agency representatives. And so the code for the committee says that the language is written on the screen. It says that the committee can invite ex officio representatives from other public agencies. It calls out specifically Bend Park and Recreation District, Bend Lapine School District, and Deschutes County. So I'll share just a super brief update on kind of the discussions and engagement I've had so far with each of these agencies, and then we can discuss kind of what the committee wants to do as far as next steps for going about engaging with those agencies. But I know this agenda item was proposed by Neil and I think seconded by somebody. So I also wanted to check in with you, Neil, if there was any other kind of specific discussion you were hoping to have on this topic, or just kind of a general discussion on where we're at and where we want to go.
Yeah, the latter. Just trying to make sure that we were intentional about when to invite and kind of what the process is. And in my opinion, just trying to make sure that we do it sooner rather than later, or at least as soon as we're kind of getting deeper into content, so they don't need to be as worried with the semantics of getting the group set up. But I do think it's important to have them involved from an early point. Okay, great. So I guess just to give a little bit of background on kind of what the discussion has been so far is we did have engagement from each of these entities at kind of varying degrees through the development of the CCAP. But so the Park and Recreation District had a seat on the committee, so they were probably the most involved. We did also present to the board, they had a staff member involved. We presented to the board of BPRD several times, so they kind of were following it along more closely. And at the end of the process, we also presented the Community Climate Action Plan to Bend Lapine School District. And both of those agencies did actually submit a letter of support to the City Council in support of adopting the CCAP. And both of those presentations, we kind of called out that idea of like, this is going to require a partnership, and there's a lot of strategies that we know will take different agencies kind of working together. So that discussion was had, particularly with those agencies.
For the county, we had definitely had a lot of involvement through the solid waste department because a lot of our solid waste strategies they really tied really closely to the the regional solid waste master plan that was also under development that I participated in too. So we definitely had alignment there. We did not have engagement at the county at the elected level or really too many a little bit at other staff levels, but definitely not in any formal way. So we've spoken with each of those three agencies about involvement in the ECC specifically. It's been a couple of months. I had these conversations earlier in the summer when we were kind of starting the recruitment. The Parks District has stated that they're ready to participate at any time. They have a lot of board support for participating. And the schools were also enthusiastic about participating, but we've had less discussions with them about it, but we have talked to their acting superintendent, we've talked to a board member, and we also do have a pretty close relationship with the sustainability coordinator who works at the environmental center and also for the school district there. So they're enthusiastic about participating. I do know that the school district is naturally having a very difficult year, so we haven't had a lot of discussions with them lately. I'm not entirely sure kind of where they'll, today, I'm not sure how easy it would be to engage with some of them, but I could be wrong about that. We haven't tried recently, but just want to call that out that I think schools in particular have a lot of competing priorities right now. And then we talked to a couple different staff at Deschutes County. The staff have offered to be a resource and certainly open to being involved in discussions that relate to the county. They did decline specifically participating as an ex officio representative at this time. The last discussion I had with them was several months ago, so I don't know if that will change over time. That's not to say the committee can't reach out again or that kind of thing, but we have spoken to several staff with the request about participating as an ex officio, and they've said that they're not currently interested. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that and just help facilitate any discussion you all want to have on this topic for the next little bit. But I think the main things we need to determine is, do we, at what point do we want to invite them in, and kind of what capacity do we want to invite them in? Are you all interested in making the ask that they come to as many meetings as they can and kind of actively listen and participate in discussions? Or do you want to set up some, are you interested in having kind of a staff contact at each of those that we can pull in as the topics are relevant? So I'm just curious to hear where everyone's at on that topic. Serena?
Yeah, being conscious of everyone's time, I do think it's important that any representation from each of those areas is invited to every meeting and gets that information. I'm looking to hear from everyone else on the thoughts around when they should participate and depending on agenda items. But I personally feel the more information you have and the background and the discussions that we have in these meetings are usually, it's hard to read that kind of information in notes at times. And so I definitely think that if they can, as much as they can, be part of these conversations.
Mark?
Not to jump in too much, but I'd agree. I think it'd be great to have them involved, and as Serena said, keep them invited. If they have more involvement in ownership, they'll probably be better partners, especially when we're looking to try to help coordinate or even influence their decisions as well, or inform their decisions. So yeah, I think I'm all in favor of as much involvement as we think we can get. Do you have a sense, Cassie, of their willingness, if they would prefer that we don't burden them with every meeting, or if they would be willing?
It seemed to me like it seemed to me like they would be willing, particularly if we pick staff that are interested in it and kind of have a natural alignment, which I think is probably who we would. And I know from the Parks District, at least, it was a while ago now, but it was probably April or May, when I think their board felt pretty strongly that staff should be actively participating. And then I think at the school district, as long as we can find the right person who has the capacity given their constraints, I think they would be willing to. especially at the staff level. I think as far as like engaging electeds, which sometimes there's interest in engaging the electeds, probably wouldn't be a good fit for participating in every meeting, but we might be able to work with the staff. If there are staff that come more regularly, we might be able to work with that staff to like figure out when to elevate something to their board or that kind of thing and how to best engage that. Kelly?
To keep it efficient and to have the best possible collaboration, having a liaison between each of these individual groups and perhaps having someone dedicated from our committee to coordinate may be most effective.
Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts? Serena?
I do have another. So knowing the current standing of Deschutes County and what you mentioned, are there other representation that we feel might want to, or that we feel is important to be a potential non-voting member that we haven't discussed?
I'm just not sure. Maybe Ian, if you're there, you can advise, but would the committee be able to appoint like ex officio members that were not explicitly written in the code? Because we did have, those three agencies were written in the code. It was the council at the time had specifically called those out.
Yeah, I think not really, not as members. The kind of alternative for that is committee can always invite people to a session if you want input on a particular topic, insight on a particular topic. You can always invite people to present. There's obviously the option of creating subcommittees and work groups to tackle something in particular. So, you know, based on the way the code is written, there really isn't the opportunity to appoint or invite anybody else as a non-voting member. So you kind of have to, I guess, break it down to a little more granular level and engage with people through invitations to present, engage that don't really involve committee membership.
Thank you for that clarification.
Other thoughts on ex officios in general? So based on kind of what I've heard, I'm thinking like the committee would the committee want me to go and make contact with those staff again and invite them to like the next meeting? Or do you feel like we need to wait a little bit until we've talked a little bit, until we've done a little bit more of the foundation building with the committee? Or are you like, let's get them here as soon as possible? Bill?
Well, I'm a little concerned that the county is not wanting to participate very much. I would hope that we can bring them in, because we can't, as the city is in the county, and it seems like there's a lot of things we want to do are going to require participation from the county. So it would, whether it's right now, or whether it's later, I just hope somehow we can find someone who has the interest and willingness to come to the committee meetings, at least the ones where it's relevant. The other ones, it sounds like we're okay with, the school district and the Parks and Rec, but I think the county is a really important partner in this.
I was going to make the exact same comment. The lines start to blur very quickly between the city and the county in achieving a lot of our objectives. And also to that point, we know there's new county leadership, and I would imagine there could be a new perspective on collaboration between the city and county on achieving these goals. We will be hamstrung without the buy-in and engagement of the county.
Tavi?
Yeah, I agree with both the points raised so far in terms of seeing if we can get the county to also, be a part of this. And I think my other question, and I apologize if this was already covered. So as ex officio members, they wouldn't be voting on actual motions or anything like that, or decisions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I think my only other concern was with the 3 additional members. I just wonder if there's a trade-off at becoming too large in terms of scheduling, meetings, or seeing if they can make all of them, and if it would make sense to maybe have like a quarterly meeting that's has more of the topics that they can pitch in on, and then also having more, the rest of the meetings can be more if we're getting into the nitty gritty on things where we don't necessarily need their input, or they're keeping them informed in that sense. So if that's something that would increase their level of interest or participation, if that's something we can also consider.
Thanks, Rory.
The point about the county, I agree. It would be helpful, or it would be great to have a representative from the county sort of joining as an ex officio member. But Mark, to push back just a little bit, I don't think we'll be like too hamstrung in achieving the goals that we have in the CCAP by not having sort of buy-in there. It's a city plan, and city has its own jurisdiction, and there are important overlaps. Solid waste, big one that comes to mind, but let's not think of it as a huge setback if we don't get participation from the county.
And I think too, just to be clear on where there are specific strategies where the county role is like vital, because there are a couple, they definitely, several staff I've talked to, which includes, people just at the people in leadership positions over there, have definitely indicated willingness to talk with the county or talk with the committee, contribute to discussions kind of on an as relevant basis. So they weren't trying to shut out like, no, we won't engage with those topics, but they just weren't comfortable. And I'm not exactly sure why, but they just weren't comfortable as being like a formal ex officio. So I don't think that if they're not ready to participate in that capacity now, I don't think it won't prevent us from engaging them when it shouldn't, when it's really relevant. And I think it makes sense to keep the invitation open, especially if, with anytime there's new leadership, like these types of, the approach can kind of change. I think it would be a little premature to reach out to them like this month, because I talked with them fairly recently, and they were the only ones I went back to like 2 times and was like, will you be an ex officio? And so I know that they're definitely not interested now. So I don't know that there's a lot we can do about that, but I think they're definitely available for sure, depending on the topic. And we can kind of reach out to the staff that makes the most sense. And we can still keep it open in the future. But I think as a next step, I'll re-engage with this BPRD and Ben Lapine, because it's been a little while since then, and see if they can start attending some meetings in the future. And as far as like scheduling around them, I think the approach that we typically take with ex officios is, and what they will likely do is they're not going to be, we can't require them to attend in the same way. So we would prioritize scheduling for committee members, and then I would imagine a lot of the ex officios would kind of review the agendas in advance. And if they saw no overlap, they're also very busy, they may not attend some of those meetings. So a lot of times that can be kind of self-regulating in that way, which I think usually works pretty well.
Did you get a sense, Cassie, in your conversations with the county that the constraints were more around time and resources, or around a kind of a philosophical approach to the committee's business?
They didn't really elaborate. They didn't elaborate very much. Like I had discussions with them where it was just kind of exchanging information. This is what we're doing. This is why, this is what kind of role the county might play. And then the response was like, okay, we'll talk about it and let you know. And then it was just like, we can't at this time. So I don't have a lot of insight into that. Okay. Does everyone feel good about kind of the next steps I outlined on that topic? Okay, perfect. So then this next discussion, we don't have a ton of time left today, but I would like to take 15 to 20 minutes. if we can, I'm really curious to know from you all, like, I feel like we had just a mad dash the last couple of months to kind of get through like some of the guidelines and principles, going over the CCAP and getting ready for this council priorities. And I just thanks to you all so much for being willing to kind of run with that and just jump in those first few meetings. But I want to take a step back now and open the floor for discussion to kind of hear, you know, we talked at the last meeting about there's not a huge rush to decide exactly what your priorities are in a month or 2 months. You do have time to kind of work through what you want to work on and how you want to work on it. And I just want to make sure that you all are set up for success and you kind of feel like your process and the way we're going about things like is effective for you all. So that, because that's obviously the best way to be the most effective in the long term. So I wanted to take a step back and hear from you all just kind of where you think you're at and what kind of information or discussions you want to have next in order to start doing the work. And I mean it very kind of open-ended. So kind of just some ideas that I've heard or that I can kind of think of is like, for example, in the last meeting we had, I know we discussed a desire to have kind of a presentation and a review of more just like of the city in general and what the council's priorities are, because we refer to those a few times and not everyone is equally as familiar with kind of what the city's focus has been in the past, where it's going in the future, how does that all work? So I definitely think that is one thing that I was thinking at the next meeting would be good to spend some time focusing on. And by then we would know the new council goals likely, so we can kind of talk about just the big picture of the city and how this work fits in. So that's one discussion I think we should have. Some other things are like, do we want to do a visioning process or other kind of foundational things for the committee? When I talked to Kirsty, she felt pretty strongly in favor of doing some sort of committee vision outside of just the CCAP. Like, what does this committee want to do? Do we want to create an actual work plan? Some committees, but not all, create an actual 2-year work plan for themselves. And that's kind of how that's the process they go through to kind of determine their priorities. And then is there just other information you all want? Like, do you want to talk to specific city departments to learn more about how they work, like from the transportation department? Do you want to bring in outside experts on some of the topics that we know we're going to be working on and get some more of that information? Or do we want to wait and do that on a kind of a topic by topic basis as we after we determine our priorities? So that's just kind of the open discussion I'm wanting to have now, is what all you need and how you want to spend the next couple of meetings to set yourselves up for the most success. Kelly?
Yeah, I personally would love to hear, we have so many amazing local experts, and I would love to hear from them. And I, as I mentioned via email, whether that is setting up like field trips or presentations, but I think I personally would benefit quite a bit from hearing from some of these individuals who have well-established organizations or processes within our county before determining what our priorities are.
Neil?
Yeah, I really like that idea as well. I also think that one of the kind of outstanding questions in my mind is relating to kind of our charter as a committee and being able to respond to specific requests from council, and not knowing, like, with that kind of as a pretext, I'm curious if we can assume that there's a timeline, if we can assume that there's a timeline that the city council might be asking something of us. It seems like if we build out a work plan and priorities and then get asked to evaluate something that was different or prioritize something that was different, that might be challenging. So I guess that's an open question on if on what that timeline and kind of commitment on the city council side of things would be. And if we knew that they might be coming to us with some specific questions later, then we could work on some more kind of base building and context setting stuff before that.
And just, I guess, one kind of like sort of response on that is that one way that we can do that right now is kind of an interesting time, because since we really do our work in the biennial phase, we're really wrapping up most projects. So there's not a lot in the short term, which is actually really helpful for you all, since there's not like something you need to respond to immediately. But we will be doing, once the council goals are complete, the staff in late February will be building out a work plan to achieve those council goals. And that's where we will write out what are the big projects and things that are going to be happening in the next 2 years. I imagine that we won't know the exact timing of each of those, but I was planning probably at the March meeting, or maybe, I don't think it'll be ready by our February meeting, but sometime in the spring, kind of showing you all what that whole city work plan is, so that you all can see and even identify for yourselves, like what some processes, that some plans that are happening or decisions that are being made that you all might want to make sure you're kind of tracking. And then we can include those in, you know, a rough kind of schedule or work plan. So that's one way that we can get at that. Bill?
Yeah, what you just said, I think is important, because it's going to be really important for us to be able to latch on to opportunities as they come. So if we know that the city or the county, or if something is going to be coming up that could be an opportunity, we don't want to miss it. And so knowing what is in the plan would really help us, because I want to make sure we don't lose any opportunities. And part of that thing, other thing that's been thinking about a lot is not so much jumping into the solutions, because we have a big list of action items, but how we're going to prioritize kind of the more meta thing, the meta level, where we go establishing some kind of a prioritization matrix by how we say what we should focus on, and or is, if you look at a set of action items in each of the categories in the plan, how do we pick what we should be focusing on, and have that be something we can use in our discussions and our recommendations. So I want to not miss opportunities. So I think getting some in the beginning, finding out what's out there now, and then growth ties into that as well. Where are those opportunities in growth? And then I think really sitting down and thinking, having all of us think about what we think are the most important attributes to recommend an action is important to do. And I think we should do that sooner than early in the process, at least.
So maybe like, what a way to get at that in the next meeting or two, have a discussion about like what criteria, like trying to coalescing around some criteria that the committee wants to use to prioritize projects, because after that we could then look at all of the different actions and across those criteria, and then kind of use that to do a prioritization. Would something like that help to get at that?
I think it would be useful. I mean, I don't know what other people think, but I think having some basis by which you compare things is kind of useful, as opposed to just looking at everything ad hoc. Mm-hmm.
Another thing too, I'll just add that I was starting to put together was a little bit of like building out the action. I was going to build out the action plan in kind of a matrix of just some additional information that might be helpful. Like I started to map out which are things that are processes that are kind of occurring. Like we don't have control over the timeline, but the committee will need to weigh in on those things at the right time. So like the PUC process related to renewable electricity, 100% renewable electricity is an example of those. I can't think of the others off the top of my head, but there's some of those that are like, they'll occur when they occur, and the committee just needs to be ready to weigh in on those. Then there's other things that the committee actually doesn't necessarily need, they're going to happen anyway, and they just support the CCAP. And so the committee doesn't even necessarily need to initiate those, maybe doesn't even need to weigh in on certain things, but they would definitely be things I think the committee would want to track, because we'd be tracking for this, just for progress on the CCAP, and you'd all probably want to know kind of how they're going about certain things. So things like like the transit and the solid, a lot of the transit and some of the solid waste stuff falls into those categories because the transit agency is building out the transit system in a certain way. That's not to say the committee couldn't weigh in, but it's not like we need the committee to move those things forward. And then there's the other bucket is the biggest bucket, which are truly things that the committee would need to initiate for them to happen most likely. And so I think that can kind of help because we talked about that a little bit, like as far as prioritizing. Some of the really big ones might be things that take less committee time than the ones where the committee would really need to initiate. It's just a different decision-making process, I think, about what to initiate versus what to weigh in on. So that information, and then also which of the strategies, like the city could lead alone versus which of the strategies there's a key implementation partner that would really need to be on board, because that also kind of changes how it might make sense to interact or recommend a strategy. So I was going to work on building, I started to do that a little bit, and I was going to work on building some of that out, and I was planning on bringing that at one of the next meetings too, if that would be helpful. I see the next hand raised I see is Rory.
Yeah, Cassie, I think that would be super, super helpful. Something I was thinking after our last meeting, when we sort of went through our own priorities, was I really want to hear from you as the staff person who works on this stuff full time, of where you think we should prioritize and where we can have the biggest impact. So I agree with a lot of what folks have just said, Neil and Bill, and I'm maybe sketching out a bit of a process or a plan to throw out there for the group. So council goal setting will be huge, Neil, as you pointed out. So I wouldn't want to jump into our sort of work planning or visioning until we sort of know what's going on there, because that will greatly affect kind of our scope, I think. And then Cassie, what you just talked about, a prioritization, well, not prioritization, but bit of a matrix of categorizing the different action steps from the CCAP would also really help us guide a work plan. So And then I also heard folks wanting to hear more about experts in the area and maybe processes at the city. So I think what might be best for us is to take next month to do some more of that background. Like maybe there's folks we want to invite in to hear from, or more about the city's processes, just to get everyone familiar. And then after that meeting, hopefully we'll have clarity on council goals, and you'll have the matrix you just talked about, Cassie. And then I would suggest we could jump into more of a visioning or work planning process, because I do think that'll be really helpful for us. And if we can line it up with council goals, we'll be better off too.
Okay, that's helpful, Rory. Thank you. Tess?
Yeah, and Rory, forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing maybe what you just said, but I do want to bring it back to what Kelly had brought forward about engaging people in the community and potentially other models out there in the world, because as much as, you know, Bend or this committee might want to be a leader in this process, there is a lot to be said for basing our work on successful models and the capacity that currently exists. So Cassie's contribution to the matrix will be incredibly important. And Rory, this is the part I might mischaracterize. I don't know if you meant that within this next month, we'll engage those experts in the field and bring them in and then make decisions based on that. But I wonder if instead it would be best to hear back from the council goal setting, Cassie's matrix, and then move forward as a group, kind of building out that group, that matrix of experts and models that we are all as a group aware of, and receive that potentially any participation or suggestions from the public, and then have that kind of more or less probably exhaustive list and use that to engage some folks and make some priorities off of that, rather than using that input in a very discrete time period and trying to make some decisions going from there.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, Tess, that it might make more sense to have that input from other folks in the community and experts maybe after those other steps of council goals and Cassie's work with the matrix. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think too, well, yeah, so I'd like to dive in just for a minute on kind of bringing in those outside experts, because I think there's so many different people we could bring in. Like there's so many good partners out there that on the one hand, it might make sense to, you have to wait until we have some ideas and then bring in the people that work in a particular space that we know we need to focus on. On the other hand, I do think it makes sense. I think the idea of like knowing what's out there in the community, and so knowing where there's alignment could also help set those priorities. So it's a little bit of a mix there. So I'm wondering, is there anyone, in terms of hearing from experts, does anyone have an entity or a group that they feel like they want to hear from sooner than later, like someone that you feel is really instrumental in kind of even before we dive into specifics? Because we could invite experts on every single topic. Like it could take a long time to really get a full understanding of what's going on but there might be one or two though that we could bring in early that kind of help lay the groundwork. Serena.
Yeah, sorry, I had kind of a thought before you asked that question, but I can, this is kind of part of that research and the previous documentation and stuff from this other CCAP committee. But we had done a pretty thorough, I forget what we call it, but it was kind of a brainstorm of community partners for, all phases and scope of each of those 4 categories. And we worked with, as you mentioned, kind of quite a lot of them. I'm wondering if we have that list available, and I'm sure that there's more that we potentially didn't, represent in that list that this team would be able to add to for sure. I think that would be an accessible document that would be super helpful and potentially help with that question as well. And then specifically, I don't have anyone other than what we had already talked about with I'd really like to hear from the members, the non-voting members that we had mentioned earlier, having kind of an intro when we do bring them on and understanding their positions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a really good reminder about the list of community partners we talked about in the beginning, because those are people that have been engaged already, a lot of them. And so we can kind of maybe start there and then talk through that. Kelly?
In addition to Serena's comments, the Oregon DEQ, which is nationally recognized group, and here sort of locally.
Yes, definitely. And we have good contacts there. I usually work with their materials management department. Is that who you're thinking of?
Yeah, and I also have some contacts there from previous roles, so happy to help support that.
Yeah, great. Tess?
This, I guess, is kind of a bid to, I'm sure that community partners list is impressive and extremely useful, and we could get suggestions through them as well, but to look beyond the scope of our community for other models. There's at least one organization that I know of based in Colorado, California, and I think DC maybe, that kind of ticks a lot of the boxes on some of the energy consumption and social equity stuff that is part of the plan. So just really looking for those really robust models outside of our community might be useful as well. And I'll plug them because I don't want to just hold you in suspense. It's called Grid Alternatives if you want to look it up. But it's just, I no doubt you guys know of other things that tick those boxes as either the same part of the plan or other parts of the plan. So it's just an idea to keep our minds open beyond the community.
Thank you. Rory?
Yeah, sort of piggybacking on Kelly's suggestion of someone from DEQ, that reminded me of, we have this new governor's executive order in Oregon directing multiple state agencies to implement greenhouse gas reductions, right? So there's all sorts of fun rulemaking going on at DLCD. I know they recently formed a climate smart cities rulemaking advisory committee. And then Cassie, you already mentioned at the PUC, they're working on stuff with community green tariffs and things like that. So maybe inviting staff from those agencies to give us an idea of what's on their agenda with implementing the governor's executive order and specifically like how they see local governments like Bend, like partnering and implementing a lot of what they're working on. That could be helpful.
Definitely. So kind of what I'm thinking, because the last agenda item is for today is also planning our next meeting, but I want to talk about it now because it's starting to come together for me a little bit based on this discussion. But I'm wondering if, so I do think it would be very helpful to do kind of this overview of the council and kind of what their priorities have been in the past. And we should have, I'm pretty sure that we'll have the new council goals by then. And so that would be that's kind of really good anchoring information. And also just a little bit like super brief overview of kind of how the city approaches work in general, because it does, all cities have a different approach on how they work on things like environmental stewardship and equity compared to like their core services, which is building streets and roads and that sort of thing. And so I think explaining a little bit about, for people that aren't familiar, just the approach that Ben takes is, it has a pretty significant impact on how we kind of make decisions and approach things. It changes over time for sure. And I think it will continue to change, but that's a type of history I think would be helpful to share a little bit. So maybe starting with that, and then I'll go over this matrix that I have of just kind of the different ways we can look at the actions. And I may have some information too about the work plan, but focusing on the action, we can kind of flesh out more of like where each of the actions sit and different ways to think about them. And I can also share just what my personal thoughts are on kind of what the priority should be in terms of like, I usually look at it in terms of like, where is there just alignment? What is like a smaller lift versus a bigger lift and that kind of thing? So we can have a discussion on that. And then I think on the community partners, because there's so many different people we could potentially bring in, I think maybe it would be helpful to spend time talking about community partners. We can share which ones we've already engaged, who's closely involved and kind of closely following, because some of the people you've all mentioned have been really closely following. And then we can have a discussion about, especially based on kind of that, what we heard in the matrix and the council priorities, which of those members we want to invite in for the following meeting. And several of them had requested that, like Pacific Power is also very interested in coming in and meeting with the group. So I think we could set those up pretty quickly. But I think it would be good to be intentional about who we invite in, so that it's not just adding kind of, it could easily like spiral and add confusion to what to prioritize. So I think it'd be good to be a little bit more strategic about it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking might be a good next month's agenda. Does anyone have things they'd like to add to that list of discussions?
So I forgot to raise my hand.
No, go ahead.
I had a clarifying question. So I feel like there's two things that were mentioned. One is like the experts on the kind of the environmental side, like the EQ and, other agencies like that. And then there's the community engagement partners. Did I kind of get that correctly? Like more the organizations that engage the community as a whole. And I'm just wondering, so when you mentioned I just want to get clarity on what you mentioned for the next meeting.
I would probably include all of the above, because those are not always separate groups. Like a lot of our subject matter experts are actual implementers of ideas or close partners in implementing those ideas. But I can help. I think that could be part of what I can lay out for you is like who's been engaged and how. And then we can just use that to structure a discussion around who do we want to invite in. And it may be from this list, but it may also be like test recommended people from other communities that we know have good models, if that makes sense.
So I guess my one additional question on that front is I don't know if that list already includes groups, but especially considering the equity side of one of the goals that we have, one of the objectives, are we also going to kind of is like a listening session, or like are we still getting input from just community groups that do represent different diverse groups in community itself, even if they're not environmentally focused?
Like, do we have anything planned right now, or have we done that in the past? Which is your question?
I guess both. Have you done it in the past, and is that one of our goals sorry, Snowy, is that one of the roles that we have as part of the ECC, or is that more of a city council thing? I'm going to mute myself.
No, so we have done that in the past. We kind of highlight, it's in one of the appendices in the CCAP, kind of explains more in detail how we engage some of those nonprofit groups. I think it's definitely a good idea to do it in the future. But you know, that's definitely up to the committee. So I know it's 1 o'clock, so I do want to allow people to leave if they need to. I can stay on for a couple minutes for some follow-up questions, but one thing I want to say quickly before we leave, before people leave, is that we do at the next meeting need to elect a chair and a vice chair. I was hoping to discuss that today and gauge temperature, but at this point we need to do it. So I can write an email about that, but if anyone, I've got a few emails from people that were potentially interested in the past. So anyway, I'll send an email out with more instructions if I need you to let me know. But mainly if you're considering being the chair, we'll need you to, it would be great for people to nominate themselves at the next meeting, and then we'll make that decision. So if someone wants to move to adjourn the meeting, we can adjourn. But like I said, I'm happy to stay on and answer some additional questions for people.
May I make one comment just about what you were suggesting for the next meeting, Cassie?
Sure. I just want to let people, if people need to leave at 1, I do want to let them sign off.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, we've been talking about having experts come in, and I'm not in a hurry for that. I think we need, what you're suggesting is more high level, like trying to figure out what's going on in the city, what the planning, what's out there now, how to categorize what actions we should take. I think that's where we need to focus right now. And it's because it could be distracting and it could take a lot of time having experts in. And I think they need to come in. I think that's great, but they should come in when it's appropriate and when it's relevant. So, and some of that may be forward. Some of that may be bringing forward where we're trying to create a vision where someone who's an expert in that case to help us put our vision together. But a lot of it is, an expert is someone who knows something, a lot about something, and it makes more sense to bring them in when that something is what you're talking about. So I'm happy that we're going to stay at kind of a high level at the beginning here and setting a framework and where we should be going.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Are you still looking for a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I think we should, so that we can officially end the meeting since we're at time, and I do want to be respectful of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion to adjourn the meeting today.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, meeting adjourned. And like I said, happy to stay on for anyone that would like to, but everyone else is free to go, and we'll see you next month.
Okie dokie.
Did you have a question, Kavi?
I did, and it was also more of a request and see if it's something that's possible. So I know at the first meeting, everyone had introduced themselves and kind of their background and their expertise and what they bring to it. I was wondering if there's a way to kind of create maybe a document with like a short bio for everyone that we could then refer to just have an idea of where those expertise lie. If that's something that people would be willing to share, maybe a short paragraph, I think that'd be really helpful to have an idea on paper of what skills and what experience everyone brings to this, especially as we start going forward. So if that's something that you're able to compile and share with us, so it's not like a meeting or anything.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I actually have, I have something kind of started because I've given brief, not like bios, but just kind of bullets on different, for the counselors, I've done that before. So I could start with that and everyone could just edit theirs because I did it based off of the applications, not knowing you all super well yet. But yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Bill or Neil, did you guys have anything additional questions you wanted to discuss?
Nope.
Perfect.
I'm done. I'm going to head out.
Okay.
Thanks. That was a good
All
meeting.
right. Yeah, thanks,
Good.
Kathy.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cassie.
Bye.